in the Carabao Cup, where Newcastle got the win over Liverpool, finally putting an end to a difficult run over the years of finals that they've made but not been able to get over the line. Well, this time they did it in 2025. As you can see, they missed out at the final hurdle in the same cup in 2023, lost out in FA Cup back-to-back years back in the 90s, same in the 70s with League Cup and FA Cup, but the wait for a trophy is over and the celebrations are no doubt still going on in Newcastle. Let's get some of the reaction from the Newcastle camp yesterday.
Wow, unbelievable. No words needs. After 7 years, we just get it. I'm very happy. I think we did this for the fans. They deserve it. Wow, no words. It's still crazy things going into my head, but what a moment to be a Newcastle United fan.
Hopefully it's the first of many. I said, like, I didn't like saying it, but it did feel like a bit of a burden, I think. How long it had been. I think it was, we felt the pressure, but I felt it was just going to take that one time to break through that ceiling, and hopefully that's the start of many.
We now welcome in Mario Melchiot as well. Shaka's still smiling, as you can see. I don't even need to look. I can feel like the gleam coming from the side of my eye here. Craig, first time I've seen you since this result. It is rightly so, isn't it? It was totally deserved for Newcastle.
Oh, I mean, I've got to disagree a little bit with Stevie yesterday when he said Newcastle didn't do anything, have to do it. I thought Newcastle were great. I thought everything they did it fantastically well with pace, were incisive, could have scored more goals, had the offside goal ruled out. I think it was Guimaraes in front of the goalkeeper. Yeah. You could go through every facet of the Newcastle team, and it was excellent. And we talked about this a couple of days before. We said, what's a pathway to a Newcastle victory and finally break this sort of hoodoo of trophies? And it was twofold, Kay. It was Liverpool having an off day, which they did, and it was all of Newcastle's big players, and they're all big players, but I mean the kind of stars. It was all of those turning up, and that's exactly what happened. And when you put those two together, you get this kind of performance and this kind of result. You know, you can look at the middle of the park in Guimaraes and Tonali. You can look at Alexander Isak and Jacob Murphy and Joe Linton's, I just think, is a terrific player. When he was out of that Newcastle team, they felt it. But for me, the best, what epitomised Newcastle was Dan Burn. I thought he was absolutely just, it was like, this might never happen again. But you have to look at Arne Slot here. How can you leave Dan Burn to get picked up by Alexis McAllister after they've had at least 2 or 3 corners prior to that where they're markings only and McAllister's the block and it hasn't worked? And you could see it as clear as day that Newcastle had worked on it in the training ground, because that's where Trippier was pinging the ball. He was missing out the 6-yard box, he was playing it to the back, and they were looking for Burn to come in, either knock it in as he did, or knock it into the 6-yard box where you might get bits and pieces. Now, when it happens once, you might say, OK. When it happens twice, you have to make an adjustment. And Liverpool did not, and they paid the penalty. And I think, more than the tiredness, that summed up the sloppy nature of Liverpool's performance. In fact, we could say it's been a sloppy, 3 weeks for them? Maybe 4 weeks? Starting back when he named a very poor side, or a very weak side, for the FA Cup game at Plymouth, and they got beat. To me, that started to send a bit of a signal down the line. But Newcastle, absolutely brilliant. I was thrilled for them, just the way that they played.
I would say again, and just to, again, maybe start with the negative around Liverpool and the Dan Burn, or reluctance to pick him up. They had the warnings. There was one in the first half where Dan Burn came right over the top of McAllister, got ahead to it. It just narrowly missed Guimaraes, and nobody heeded that warning. Now, maybe you want to say Slot could have changed something at half-time, but kind of given the fact that either Slot didn't shout onto the park for there to be a change, or there was a lack of leadership from Liverpool on the park in the moment to recognise that mismatch. Whichever way, they paid the ultimate price. And credit to Dan Burn, again, for his performance, for his leadership, everything that he represented about that football club, and you cannot sing his praises highly enough. But at the same time, you go around every single player for Newcastle, and it's the same sentiment. Whether we want to talk about young Livramento up on the left, up against Mo Salah, and those stats have been making the rounds for both Livramento and Mo Salah. Whether you want to talk about Kieran Trippier on the other side and kind of give him some of the poor performances we saw from him 12 months ago, comes in and does not put a foot wrong, is the leader, is the experienced player that Newcastle needed to be in this big moment. The midfield speaks for itself. Tonali, given his issues and how he's come in and fit into this squad this season, has been exemplary. The two alongside him in Guimaraes and Joe Linton, again, you cannot sing their praises highly enough. Barnes coming in for the suspended Gordon. Again, everything just came together so well. They recognised the moment better than Liverpool, certainly. And while Liverpool have not been great for some time, this was as poor a performance as you'd seen or could expect from a team like them in the final. Really nothing to write home about as far as Liverpool were concerned. And I think a lot of that goes down to Newcastle and Eddie Howe.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the opposite manager with you, Mario, if I can, Arne Slot. As the guys were saying, that mismatch when you saw McAllister on Dan Burn, the zonal marking, the decisions here defensively from Arne Slot.
Yeah, I think Arne Slot, what he really did well for me, you understand, during the season is he learns from his mistakes really quickly. This was clearly a big mistake because if you have, like McAllister, 5'9", and a 6'2" defender, and you have to mark him. McAllister didn't even look at the ball sometimes. He just watched the player. And you know already, when you're watching a player and don't look at the ball, you know you're almost always late. Because when the ball is traveling, you are looking at him, he makes one fake, he goes the other way. So Burn was kind of in a situation, there was zonal marking because they had Van Dijk and Konate in the middle. And they kept on, just like Craig said, they have practiced this situation so well. Liverpool was always late. I know we talked about, you guys mentioned it, the tiredness and the situation they were going through, but it doesn't matter. This is a final, you understand? And you should not get surprised. And the way the two Brazilian kids brought the fight, and then the Italian, you understand, Tonelli, you understand how he brought it, Guimaraes and Jollington. I know he went to the fans. I know sometimes you can get carried away, but they were so ready for this final. And Liverpool did not know that this was going to happen to them. This was kind of like a surprise. Salah touched the ball, 4 times in the first half? Against a kid like Liverpool. Come on, if you play against a guy like that, it doesn't matter if it's a good player, but he's so experienced, so they needed him. But that means they were so ready and prepped and even could isolate him. And I think that was one of the biggest things they achieved.
I think you did him a disservice, Mario. Dan Burn, you can put about another 6 inches on him.
Yeah.
He's about...
He's listed at 6'7".
He's listed at 6'7". That's on a good day. But, Mo Salah, just briefly on Mo Salah, he started to look disinterested, hasn't he?
But what's that down to? Why has he been ineffective in this game against PSG, in this game against Newcastle? Is he not getting the service he needs, or is it something more than that?
He goes through these periods and he's got this... I don't know what the hell he's doing at the end of the season, but he looks fed up. He looked fed up when they went out of the Champions League. Well, you would be. He was pretty disinterested in this game in terms of his work rate, which was non-existent, almost as non-existent as his product at the other end. So he looks kind of fed up. But can I go back to... we can't spend the whole show on a header, but or corner kicks and how the marking. But this is about leadership. Something that Liverpool have had from Van Dijk. You don't have to look over to your manager when the 6'7" guys won 2 headers and it's put your team in peril. If you're Virgil van Dijk and it's happened twice in the first half and then they get another corner, right, I don't care what Arne Slot wants. We're not having this again. Either I'm going to go out and mark him or I'm going to get Ibrahim Konate to go out and stand on his toes. Right, I've made that decision. McAllister, you come in here and fill a space. But they didn't. And it's almost like they're so robotic these days, some of these players, that, the manager said, we have to have 4 across the edge of the box, and he has to do that. When it's not working on the field, Shaq, somebody has to take responsibility.
And that was the amazing thing for me, that nobody made the adjustment. And again, maybe you want to take some of the responsibility away from, some of the blame away from Arne Slot and say, well, it didn't get to half-time and he could have adjusted at half-time. But on the field, somebody's got to make that adjustment. And the other thing to it, and again, just kind of seeing the highlight again for the Dan Burn goal, Kwanzaa's man marking. I can't remember who it is, but Kwanzaa has got his arms around a player middle of the goal. So there are man-marking responsibilities. How nobody takes a man-marking responsibility on Dan Burn, given what you've seen for 44 minutes from every set piece up to that point, again, is simply beyond me. Now, if you want to say, well, we do zone, fair enough. But Kwanzaa is hugging a player in the middle, so there are man-marking responsibilities. Yet still, at 6'7", nobody man-marks Dan Burn. You leave that to McAllister, who's a solid foot shorter, maybe a little bit less. But still, that makes absolutely no sense.
I texted Stevie yesterday off the back of it, because I knew you guys were in. I said, it's a good job they have this gap over Arsenal.
Yeah.
I mean, really, because... And you have to give them credit for that. All the sort of hard work, the spade work was done in the first part of the season, where they were brilliant. But they're going to win the Premier League, and yet it feels, which is a great achievement, an amazing achievement, but it all feels a little flat. And dare I say it feels a little disappointing now, in the manner in which they went out of the FA Cup, and the manner of their performance in the Carabao Cup final, and the manner in which they were bossed pretty much for 180 minutes, or not quite, but they certainly did a good first half in the second leg, but the rest of it and the extra time they were bossed. And it almost feels like they're going to get and lift this Premier League title, and it feels a little bit disappointing, which is strange to say, because, you know, when Arne Slot comes in, you know, and Liverpool have only won it once in the last, I think, 30 so years, because, you know, when Jurgen Klopp did it, so it's a huge achievement. But at this moment in time, it doesn't feel that way. It feels that they've let the season really get away. And as I say, if that gap was 5 or 6 points to Arsenal, the way they're playing in the last few games, I would be really, really worried.
Now, obviously, fatigue and tiredness has been a big topic of conversation with Liverpool. This is what Arne Slot had to say on it. He said the game was slow, not intense, so it's difficult to judge if we were physically ready. Mentally, I prefer to look at how the game went exactly the way they wanted, with a lot of duels and a lot through the air. If we play 10 games of football through the air, they win 9 times, which led to the first goal and to the second.
What's he talking about?
Yeah.
What is he talking about?
He's talked a lot. He's talked a lot of sense in his time that he's come in. A lot. Generally, every press conference, good or bad, when most of the results have been good, but there's been the odd bad one, the PSG, and he was pretty honest after the first game in Paris. He said, outplayed. And he generally has been on the ball in his assessment about performances and referees and blah, blah, blah. What's he talking about here? I mean, corner kicks are part of the game.
Yeah, but to that point, I find this such a disservice to Newcastle's performance, because it makes it sound as though Newcastle were a Route 1 team, just launched it long, didn't really offer an awful lot else. And I feel Newcastle was so much better than that. Newcastle pressed Liverpool high up the park, stifled any kind of momentum that Liverpool could get. I've spoken about Mo Salah and how ineffective he was up against Livramento. That's got nothing to do with the air game. That's got nothing to do with Dan Burn's height. That's got nothing to do with set pieces and whether you're zonal mark or man mark. Mm-hmm. That's about Newcastle having a game plan and going about it in the best way to beat Liverpool Football Club, not allowing Liverpool to play their game. So to Craig's point, for everything we've kind of praised Arne Slot for up to this point, I find this disrespectful. I find that not giving Newcastle their just deserves, because Newcastle got it right. There's no question to this. Newcastle got it right.
Is Liverpool's season catching up with them then, Mario? What do you think he's talking about here, Slot?
Yeah. I think you know, like if you look at his background, right? Because when you come in Holland, it's not as intense. It's not as effective. You understand? We saw a game. I give an example against Nottingham Forest after international break. comes back, he lost the game. He comes to this game now, and all the points that Craig just highlighted, you know, Champions League, FA Cup, all those ones are like, sometimes when you come from a different place, you have to understand, in England, people can surprise you. And sometimes they don't have to surprise you with skill, because that is definitely what happened in the middle of the park to him. It wasn't beaten by skill only, it was beaten by character. And if we ask about, does Liverpool have character? Oh yes, they have enough. But Newcastle has some too. And the way they competed with them is kind of gave them the feeling like, guys, listen, you understand, they set back. Sometimes they played even one against one against the Liverpool side. They didn't mind Newcastle do that. They dropped off, let them play at the back, and then press them all the way one against one if they had to. And I think that is the prep of Eddie Howe. He prepped the team really well, and they were ready whatever Liverpool had. And I think energy level, they brought a lot of that in the game to Newcastle. So in a way, I think the cup finals are very interesting games. Why? Because you got to bring it on that particular day. You cannot sometimes not plan it in advance in the sense like, oh, I'm in a good form, I'm doing well. No, you got to bring it on that day. And Newcastle clearly brought it yesterday. They were ready from the first minute till the last minute. They did not mind. And they were a little shaky when Liverpool, of course, scored. Chiesa made that goal, but at the end they moved out and they did not care. They kept on, you know, fighting and making them feel like. I felt like watching the game, even after the game, I understood. It took so long, and all the emotions came out of the players too, in the sense of like saying, finally.
What does it mean for? Go on.
No, I was going to say the Guimarães giveaway in the middle of the park was very ill-timed, wasn't it? To say a better. To use a terminology. But what we have here, and Mario just highlighted it, was a manager who got his players to play to the top of their game in the biggest game of their season, and a Liverpool team who could not raise the game for one of their biggest games of the season. They've had many. But Eddie Howe read this Liverpool team like a book. He allowed them to be the set pieces, so they knew they were going to zonal mark, so they put Dan Burn to the back. Yeah. That worked. And B, he absolutely recognised that two of the weakest positions this year for Liverpool at times has been the right back and the left back. Even when Alexander Arnold's playing. Robertson's had his struggles, Tsimikas has had his struggles. It was Konza and it was Robertson. And they've both, Konza's less experienced in that position and Robertson has struggled. And they allowed Liverpool to come onto them, like the guys have said, had a good shape. When Liverpool coughed it up, they either hit them on the channel over Robertson or the channel over Konza. And you have to give Eddie Howe a lot of credit, because he's just said, he's probably, listen, keep a shape, they'll push forward, this is where we can expose them. Because they have been a little weaker in those positions defensively at times this season, there's no doubt about it. And Newcastle played an absolute blinder. For all the Liverpool stuff and blah, 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 what we saw from Newcastle was... And they were unlucky in the Carabao Cup final against United, was it a couple of years ago? Yeah, 2 years. They actually played decent, but lost. This time they really upped their game.
And now, just kind of given what he means to the club, unless you are asking for some kind of civil war in the Northeast, you cannot sell Alexander Isak. Certainly not this summer. Newcastle still within touching distance, but I think it's a point outside of the top 5, which will bring Champions League football. They're already guaranteed European football. That adds to the coffers. That adds to Newcastle's financial position. So I don't see how Alexander Isak is allowed to leave. Now, the only other side to that is Alexander Isak goes in, recognising the strength of the position he is now in, to ask for a new contract and kind of up his own bidding in that regard. But there is absolutely no way Alexander Isak.
It's not only the fans and blah blah blah. When you feel that you're building a bit of momentum at a club, obviously the fans get very excited and they're certainly enjoying this moment. But they've seen quite a few recently, particularly at St James's Park, some really entertaining games. But also from a player perspective, you can smell it as a player.
Yeah.
You know, when your team are doing badly, it's hell. You know, going to training, it's horrible. You're looking at fixtures. Oh, where are we going to pick up the next points? It's blah, blah, blah. When your team are doing well and you get into cup finals and you're winning and you're pushing for the Champions League and you're really mixing it with the big boys, certainly domestically, as a player you feel that. And the last thing you want as a player is to see the club selling some of your best teammates. Because that's then saying to you, well, if you're selling Alexander Isak and I'm Bruno Guimaraes or Joe Linton or whoever it is, I say, well, you know, maybe if that's what we're doing and how we're operating the business, why am I going to stay? And that's a very difficult scenario because it can start a snowball domino effect of, well, if Isak's gone, I'm going. And that's a big problem, as Shaq mentioned, for Newcastle. Because, and also, you try to hold on to your manager. Yeah. And Eddie Howe, who was linked with the England job before him, he's one of the managers that does get linked now and again. So you cannot afford to sell your star asset. That being said, there's a few big clubs out there looking for an Alexander Isak, and they've got a few quid to spend. So that's going to test the market. So but I would like to think he would stay.
To your point about being a part of this dressing room now and feeling like you're onto something special, you're on the verge of something special. This isn't a Newcastle team that fluked their way to a final and got Liverpool on an off day. This is a Newcastle that beat Arsenal over 2 legs. And if beating them in the semi-final over 2 legs and then Liverpool in the final, that, for me, just says everything you want to know about that dressing room, how they feel right now, how they truly believe they're on the verge of building something. And you cannot afford to take away any of those pieces, let alone a foundation piece such as Alexander Isak.
I believe he was down in the lower leagues as a player,
he was,
as a youngster.
Yeah.
And he's now, you know, via Brighton and other teams, at his, you know, a club he supported, not there because people are feeling sorry for him, there because he's been doing a great job in several positions, by the way. And I think these stories are always a great fillip for younger players, that you just never give up. And here in a week where he's won Newcastle's first trophy for how many years?
70. Well, first major for 70
for 70 years, and he's a part of that. He's got a call up to his country. He's had an England call up. I mean, really, that's kind of made of dreams, isn't it?
And he's never been involved at any level. That's the crazy bit.
No, but you know, and I go back to it, and I don't want to sound sort of smarmy here, but it happens to a lot of youngsters, and all shapes and all sports, where you get discarded, and as a younger player, you're too big, you're too small, you're too slow, you're overweight, you're not talented enough, you can't do this, you can't do that. We've all heard it, and we've all seen, and the mental fortitude when that happens to you. I mean, fortunately, I didn't have that as a kid, but I saw lots of other youngsters, particularly at Chelsea when I was coming through, and I thought they were really good players, get discarded. And I saw the emotional distress, what that meant to a young boy being sent back to Wales or sent back to Ireland or sent back to the north of England, because they've been told after 2 years, busting a gut, that they're not good enough. And most kids, unfortunately, are youngsters. They don't come back from it because it's such a hammer blow. And so for all the youngsters out there,
Craig,
you know, just never give up. Just never, ever give up.
Isn't it... I like what you say. You know why I like what you say? Because we all had it. I don't think there is any professional, whatever you do, or you know, you don't even have to be an athlete, but just in anything, you will always get that knockdown. You understand? But it's just how you bounce back. And I really, his story was incredible because, and also what you highlighted, it's like all of us had that. But the thing is that people think sometimes, you know, you knock someone down and you think like, because sometimes you can also get knocked down by the person that didn't make it and try to put it on you because he didn't make it, then he doesn't want you to make it. But the way this kid, you understand, and then scoring a goal, but then we didn't even highlight the second goal, what Isak did to Van Dijk when he stepped off him and making sure that he got himself in a position where he could do it in one touch, just touch the ball in the corner. And just overall, you understand, when we look at the goals they scored, it were all goals, was definitely those kind of goals that you practice on. And then you practice so long, and now you get a situation, and the cross comes in, Murphy wins the header, and then Isak waits. He says, I'm not a striker, but the way he stepped off, he stood close to Van Dijk, steps off him, and the ball drops exactly there. What did he do? Bang, goal. And all those points that I talk about this team is that it was a lot of prepping and a lot of execution that worked really well on the day.
Yeah.
I feel like getting up and walking over to that, just behind that monitor that I'm pointing at and getting the tissues. I'm only joking, but you know, like talking.
It's so lovely. It's so lovely.
It's just so. It's just so.
It's because